What's up, everybody? Welcome in to another edition of SSPN Recaps. I'm Jude, that's Ethan, and today we're gonna be talking some San Antonio Spurs. The Spurs have just returned from Paris, Ethan, and as much as there were some very fun moments in that trip, there were also some very bad ones. That's kind of what we left on. But I think it's ironic because I feel like both of these two games encapsulate how it feels like this season has gone for the Spurs. As much as there's been some games and losses that have been closer, than the blowout that we saw in game 2, we saw the best and the worst of this year's version of the Spurs in Paris, Ethan. And it was kind of ironic that it was in Paris, just of course with the connection for Victor, as well
Mhm.
as CD. You got to see those new courts that Victor unveiled out there in his hometown. It was a full circle moment in a lot of ways, and it was also a full circle moment in regards to how this season has gone. Does that analogy make sense?
Oh, for sure. It feels like the overall theme has been inconsistency this season for the Spurs. And, game one, we win by 30. Game two, we lose by 38. And it's any moment, depending on which game you watch, sometimes you feel like, okay, we're ready to compete now. Let's make a big trade. Let's go for the finals. Like, we're ready. And then the next day, you're like, okay, this is kind of, why the Spurs want to quote unquote play it slow, right? And continue on this path of rebuilding for the future. Um, it's frustrating for sure, but I think if you like we said last time, zoom out and look
Right.
at it, from a 20,000 foot view, this is kind of what we expect it to be, right?
Yeah. No, it's year 2. And
Yeah,
so you're yeah, and it's great because it was the same team back-to-back games. I mean,
yeah,
it's not great in that sense, but it's great from an evaluation standpoint because you can see sometimes and obviously, the hype and the upped ante being in Paris with this kind of just being, really in a sense for Victor. Like there have been other international games that the different teams have played, and some of that does kind of have to do with some sort of connection, like the Suns played in Mexico City, for example. But this was really like Wemby's homecoming in a
hmm
sense, for the first time when he was in the league. Um, and so yeah, and you got so obviously that I think plays into the first game's result. Like Victor was
hmm
really hyped up, the whole team was really hyped up. But also that was the Spurs at their best. That was
hmm
the most connected that they had looked all year. And I'm not just saying that because it was in Paris. Like we've been watching these games for most of the year. And as much as there have been some other blowout wins this year for the Spurs, I mean, the that was the closest to beautiful game ball movement that I've seen, really since because we saw some spurts in the DeJounte, DeMar, LaMarcus era. Like I'll give them some credit. Really, since then, when there were still some remnants like Patty and Rudy Gay, that did kind of play in that end of the era with well, obviously Patty was there the whole time, but like Rudy was there in that Kawhi era,
hmm
in 2016 and 2017, that were still remnants of that. And that was the closest thing that I'd seen to it. In that game, just 4 to 5 passes each possession, and just everybody else contributing off the bench. And I guess this can kind of lead us into talking about that game. But also, as just to wrap up what we were talking about in the beginning there, that was an example of how you could see the best of what this team can be. But then also the next game
hmm
against the same cast of characters, literally the same roster, you can see the opposite result happen. And I know we're over what, like Chris Paul said, we're over that young guy stuff, like he said. But also there is still a growing process for this team, when it comes to getting success around Victor Wembanyama, and it is still year 2. And game 1 was an example of how we've seen some improvements, and game 2 is also an example of how we still need some improvements in those areas, which I think really, again, like you said, it just comes down to consistency, and building consistency takes time.
For sure. I think that this was probably the closest like 2 game stretch for Victor in terms of like what the playoffs will feel like. Same team back to back, same location. First game, it felt like we kind of caught the Pacers slipping, and that's what Rick Carlisle was talking about. He was like, we kind of were treating this like a vacation almost, and then by the
Yeah.
time the game started, we were like, oh crap, like we have to play a game. And so they looked kind of flat too, and then our energy was so high. We have the French connection, so we just looked extra great on top of all of that. And then that
Mhm.
second game, that's just what you expect from a young team come playoff time, right? Is the inability to adjust to high intensity players. And the Pacers have a lot of veterans. They have playoff experience, and they came out from jump pressing us full court
Mhm.
the entire time, and we just could never recover. Like we could never comfortably bring the ball up the court. There were a couple times the refs let us get away with an 8-second violation. I don't know if they changed the rule on that. Maybe it's 10 seconds now. But like there were literally like 2 or 3 times in a row where the shot clock was down to 15 seconds and we hadn't crossed half court. And I was like, huh, I guess they're
We
just
we
feel
were
bad
playing
for us.
European rules. I don't even think that's a
Maybe
rule in the European rules, but just they let some stuff go since Victor was in town for sure.
for sure, yeah, but like they were playing aggressive with
That's a
Wemby,
great point. Yeah.
which is what he struggles with so far in the season, and they were just denying Devin Vassell the ball,
Mhm.
and maybe we could have done something as a coaching staff to get him more like better looks, but he only took 6 shots overall, and they really just let Stephon do what he wanted to do, and then he wasn't very efficient, 7 of 20, 1 for 4 from three, and you don't expect guys off the bench like Jeremy to go 1 for 5, and he felt MIA the entire game, like they
Yeah,
really
the second one.
yeah, eliminated him in that second game. But it all kind of connects back to what you were saying is like this is the best and the worst of the Spurs. And if somehow we're to sneak into the playoffs, I would expect a result kind of like this. You can
Yeah.
only hope that the Spurs learn from this loss. And if we do get into a playoff or a playing situation like that, we're more ready for the kind of intensity that will be brought to us because it's not a one and done, right? Like we can't just play one great game great and then, lackadaisically walk into the next one. Like there's
Right.
a certain intensity that you have to carry over from game to game. And Chris
Mhm.
Paul did talk about that.
Yep.
We were just unable to do it in France, which is unfortunate.
It's something that the Spurs are still trying to build, and
Yep.
that's kinda, the next step, obviously. And I think, at least in regards to the play-in specifically when it comes to this,
Hmm.
there's pros and cons. I mean, it's kind of like a coin flip. Which
Hmm.
team shows up, it'll benefit you in that sense. If
Hmm.
the good version shows up, then you'll advance a game depending on where you're at, or you'll win the one game that you need to get in, depending on how the standings go in. I think the Spurs will probably definitely be in that 9 to 10 range as the season has gone on. But just for the sake of conversation, um, with the plan, that could go well. But also, if you get the performance that we saw in game two, that could also be to your detriment and you could go home in one game. And that's kind of, for example, if we go back to the Oklahoma City Thunder before last season when they really popped off, they were in the 10 seed, and I believe that they lost that game, if I'm remembering that correctly. So
Hmm.
um, that is, also just kind of a part of the process when you're trying to build something. I know people might not like to hear that, but that's that just is what it is when it comes to this. It's not 2K where you can just automatically, fix everything in a couple of moves.
Right, right. What worries me the most, Jude, is like these next 3 games that we have all at home. We need to win really all 3 of these because in the last 10 we're
Here,
three
let
and
me go to the
seven.
schedule.
It's hard to jump around on you, but
No, you're good. You're good.
in the last 10 games, we're 3 and 7, and the Warriors, the Kings, the Mavericks, and the Suns are all in front of us right now.
Uh
And
huh.
the Warriors are 4-6 in their last 10. Mavericks are 4-6, but the Mavericks have a lot of injuries. They just keep piling up for them. I imagine that they will eventually propel forward in the playoff picture. But the rest of those teams, they're playing well right now, especially the Sacramento
Hmm.
Kings. So if we're gonna have a chance to slip into that 10-9 range, we got to start winning some of these games because we're in a real rough patch right now, which is a shame considering how a couple of our young guys are actually playing better despite the losses.
Yeah, and that's something that you guys will see in the title that we'll get into here in a second, just to give you guys the picture here, as you guys can see. And as Ethan illustrated very well, you've got the Sacramento Kings, the Golden State Warriors, the Dallas Mavericks, the Phoenix Suns, the Minnesota Timberwolves. I mean, think about all of those teams just right off the bat there. As much as the Spurs, and now everybody below the Spurs, I would say the Spurs are for sure better than. Like, I think there's a big gap there, but those are still a lot of teams like Luka Doncic. As much as we've been able to compete with the Kings this year, still DeMar DeRozan, De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis.
Oh yeah.
You've still got Steph Curry on the Golden State Warriors with Buddy Hield now coming off the bench. And as much as they had a hot start and they've kind of fallen off, I mean, that's still all of these teams have more experience than
Yeah.
us. Is what I'm getting at the end of the day. On top of all the star players like KD, Devin Booker, Anthony Edwards.
Hmm.
I mean, it's just kind of wild to look at that. But even with that being said, still only 2 games out of that 10 seed, but it's definitely going to be rough for the Spurs when it comes to that. Not saying when I say rough, I don't mean that means for sure it's not going to happen, but it's going to be a tough road. Maybe tough is a better way to put it. But really, the thing that I was getting to here, Ethan, is this just kind of goes back to a point that you made earlier in the show. At the beginning of the season, we said that the Spurs will probably be fringe playing.
Hmm.
That's about what this scenario is. They're right on the edge of maybe getting in or not.
Hmm. Which is why I think these next three
Yeah.
games are extremely important. We got the Clippers at home, Milwaukee at home, and Miami at home. I would say 2 of those are very winnable games. One of them, it's a toss up, but why they're so important, Jude, not only the rankings
Uh-huh.
thing like we just talked about, but then we have 6 games
Rodeo
on the
road trip.
road in a row. Correct. And the way the Spurs are playing on the road right now, I don't
Yeah.
trust, that record to be good.
Oh, crap. I clicked on the
Shout out perfect.
Grizzlies, but I meant to click
Happens to the best of us.
on the actual thing. I know we've done this a couple times, but what I was trying to do was pull up the Spurs road record so that we can see that, because I think you're making a very good point. Yeah, 7-12 on the road, and then let's go and see what the Spurs are exactly at home in these next 3 games. 12-10 on at home. So as much as it's still close to 500, still a big gap for the Spurs there. The Spurs definitely play much better at home, and
Mhm.
again, a Clippers team that is in the playoffs. Much significantly ahead of 500 there, 7 games ahead of 500. Um, and if we're going to beat teams like this, to your point, um, probably playing at home is going to be better for us than playing on the road, as you've said this
Mm.
season. And all of these teams are pretty solid. Obviously, Miami, out of all of the games, I think I would say is
Most
the game
winnable.
the game that is most winnable with all of the stuff going on with Jimmy Butler there. Now that doesn't mean that it's going to be easy for sure. They just smacked us with all of the Jimmy Butler stuff going on, 128 to
Mhm.
107. Um, just a couple of games ago before we went to Paris. But like you said, man, I couldn't agree more, because to your point with our road record versus home, these are going to be very important games, because if this ends up being, because this could very well be a 3-game losing streak too. So
Mhm.
if that happens going into the rodeo road trip, that's going to really set the Spurs back to have a chance in this play-in race. I mean, we're talking about it. It's so crazy to think about, but now that we're winding down past the midway point of the season, this is something that we got to start thinking about, especially with the point that you made. But also, the flip side of that is going into the rodeo road trip, that could be a point
Mhm.
of, just emphasis in the locker room. And maybe we can turn it around because of how it's gone so far this season. And every year the rodeo road trip, can kind of be mentally formulated as that. And I think that's kind of how Pop and the team have tried to frame it. So
Right. Either way, we need Devin Vassell to brush off that terrible performance in game 2
yes.
against Indiana and
Uh-huh.
revert back to game 1 versus Indiana, where he was magnificent with 25 points on 9 of 13 overall shooting. Because that's the Devin that we've been praying for every single night, Jude.
Yes. And so that's the other thing that we were going to talk about today. We were going to go game by game to recap both of these Pacers ones, but I think at the beginning of this episode, we pretty much summed that up to a point. But what we will talk about specifically, like you said, is Devin Vassell's recent performance. But unfortunately, as much as we were starting to build some consistency with Devin Vassell, Ethan, as much as the whole team played, just really bad in that second Pacers game, we are unfortunately coming off this 2 for 8, 2 for 6 performance. But again, that was really the whole team. It wasn't just him. But before that, 5 straight 20-point games for Devin Vassell. I know the Spurs were 2-5 in that point, but I mean, you can't ask for much more from Devin in those games. Maybe if the Miami game you want to criticize is a little bit efficiency wise, but still, he was the only person who could really find a bucket for us in that game. Also, but everything else above 50% from the field, and even in the Miami game, 40% from the field overall. Look at the efficiency on those numbers right there in those 5 games: 25, 23, 21, 21, 23, as well as contributions everywhere else with 2 blocks, 2 steals in that first game against Indiana. You're seeing his defense pop up more. 2 blocks and a steal against Miami, as much as that was a blowout, as well as steals in every single other game, and multiple steals in a couple of them against Memphis and LA there as well. But again, still 6-4, 5-3, 2-5,
Mm.
3-4, 2-3 as well. So always doing, it may not be something crazy, but still finding other ways to contribute than just scoring. And if we can have that consistently, then again, it's a big, you can say, well, why hasn't it happened yet? He's still 24. Like, we got to give him a little bit of time. And I was talking with one of our buddies that actually, and as much as we don't want to make excuses for coming off injuries, right, Ethan, they're in the
Mhm.
NBA. Coming off an injury, it does take some time to really get back in rhythm.
Mhm.
And as much as, it has been a while kind of since he's came back, when you factor in as well playing with new teammates, that's another thing that adds to this as well. I think that it just took him some time, and that's why. And again, obviously, we did have the 2 11-point performances before that with really rough efficiency, but I think that was also a wake up call. Like, okay, I need to just get my crap together and really be laser focused. So definitely there's some things, that Devin individually could fix. It wasn't just all of the things around him, but I think when you
Mm.
combine both of those things, you'd like to think, as much as that Indiana game was bad, that this was a turning point for him and that this is what we can start to see moving forward for him.
Yeah, you can only pray and hope. Knock on wood. You're right. Coming back from an injury, it does take a lot longer than maybe the average fan understands because
Yeah.
we're just not that athletically gifted. Never played on that level competitively. I still think he's trending in the right direction. My only request, I guess, from Devin Vassell moving forward would be that at least 50%, if not more, of his shots need to come from 2 point range.
Yeah.
Because he's being way more aggressive, which I love. He's looking for his shot, but to me, he's still taking way too many threes, which is fine. I know he's a sniper shooting 40% over the last 10
Hmm.
games. All that's great, but he needs to get his offense going in the mid range, if not getting all the way to the basket to open up things for the rest of the team. And then I think maybe we'll see some more wins.
Yeah, well, when you look at that first Indiana game right there, as much as he went 5 for 6 from three, and there was a lot of catch and shoot that was great, still 7 of his shots came from inside the paint. And I think a lot of that penetration, opens up shots for other guys on the perimeter,
Hmm.
as well as just him in isolation and being another threat to be creative and consistently be somebody off the dribble in the mid range that they have to worry about on top of Victor. That opens up looks for a Harrison Barnes who went
Mm.
9 for 10 in that game, mainly shooting off the ball, on top of Chris Paul, who can also be an off ball sniper from time to time. Now, Stephon, when I look at him in the starting lineup, that's not necessarily as much the case. But
Hmm.
even then, he was almost kind of playing similar to that Jeremy role where he was more of a glass cleaner, in that
Hmm.
situation and just fighting for boards and being a physical presence. But any final thoughts on Devin? Because that kind of shifts us into the Stephon conversation, which was the other thing we are going to talk about.
Only thing I'll say is Devin is averaging 8 points and 3 rebounds so far versus the Clippers. So let's turn that
Oh
around.
my
I think that's
goodness.
only one game, but let's turn that around, Devin.
well, here, let's see. We got a schedule up right now. So let's see. Utah, LA, Washington.
Right there, Tuesday, 12:31.
There you
We
go.
won the game, but he
Yeah,
played like crap.
and that's the only time that the Clippers are on the schedule. So yes, we want a bounce back. As that was one of our other games, that was probably one of our best games of the season there with a 40-point blowout.
Oh yeah.
And now that I think about it, I actually watched that game specifically, New
Mm.
Year's Eve. Nice little fun time there. Did have 3 steals, but oh my goodness, yeah. Let's hope for a much better offensive performance there for Devin. That would be a nice bounce back game for him. But we were just talking about Stephon Castle in the starting lineup, Ethan, and that is another theme that we've seen so far this season when he has been in the starting lineup. And obviously, when you're surrounded by more talent playing alongside guys like Victor, Devin Vassell, Chris Paul, Harrison Barnes, that can make things a little bit easier for you and open up more looks for you as well. But still, at some point, you've got to give credit. and to not just, the other guys around him being the sole reason that he's playing that way. Um, and as much as there have been a little bit of a stretch these past 3 games of some off games, as much as he was, up there, one of our leading scorers in that Indiana game,
Mhm.
despite the efficiency, 3 straight 20-point games for Stephon Castle. As much as 2 of them were losses, still, especially that first Memphis game, I thought that was a really solid game for him. Well, now that I think about it, he played well in both. To be honest, a lot of good dunks, driving to the basket in both of those games. But 20 points, 26 points, 23 points. Looking pretty good at the line as well in both of those games, and finding other ways to contribute defensively, as well as on the boards and just being a physical presence. And playing his role on offense, making extra passes, a lot of hockey assists for Stephon Castle.
Look, I think I requested at the beginning of the year that Mitch Johnson play Stephon more minutes, especially late in games,
You
and
did.
he is doing that. Now we aren't winning like I expected that we would be, but I still think Stephon as a starter with higher minutes has been effective. If you just look at his starting numbers compared to his regular numbers, he is averaging more in
Hmm.
pretty much every category on better efficiency, even from three, even though it's not much, 25% versus 29% as a starter. I love what you said about him kind of playing the Jeremy role because I think
Hmm.
that's really true. As a crasher, both as a rebounder, as a roller to the rim, as a cutter, he's been exceptional. Obviously, there's room for him to improve as just as a scorer overall, as well as a shooter. But I still think you see these high IQ plays, Jude, making the right passes, the right
Hmm.
moments, and defensively continuing to be really, really solid. I don't have the defensive metrics in front of me. I'm sure somebody's going to find one that's negative. But to me, just watching the game, he next to Jeremy Sohan is probably our best perimeter and point of attack defender, and that's extremely valuable in my eyes. Now, is he perfect? Not at all. But I still think he has been playing
He's
really
also a
well.
rookie.
Yeah, he has been playing really well in this last little stretch here.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you were making the point about the defense as well as making the right pass, the numbers may not pop off the screen in the box score specifically, but if you watch the game, he does a lot of impactful stuff that doesn't show up on the stat sheet. He's just got a great feel for the game. A lot of the stuff comes naturally to him. In the pre-draft process, we harped so much on how the Dan Hurley, like, Popovich
Hmm.
comparisons, and how you're just going to be well coached. You're going to have a high IQ. You're going to have a ton of fundamentals. And we've seen that throughout this year. And just kind of to your point with the starting lineup, I mean, notice when you look at this game log right here, Ethan, that Lakers game, when he had a great game in that one, 10 for 16 overall with the 23 points.
Hmm.
That's his first game with 36 minutes. And if you look after that, as much he did have 25 against Milwaukee, and that was another kind of overall rough team performance. Um, but everything before that, with less than 30 minutes, or less than 25 plus minutes, it's just, it's a big drop off. You have some decent games, here and there. Like, you have the Clippers game down there, then you
Hmm.
have that Philly game. But other than that, it's kind of a big drop off. You have to go back to when he was in the starting lineup before to kind of see those numbers go up again. And it's not just all about box score watching, but I think this one is something that is also applicable and matches the eye test, where
Hmm.
when he's in the starting lineup, the fit, it just feels a little bit more seamless than him playing off the bench. And it seems like the game comes a little easier to him. And obviously that's because of who he's surrounded by, but still, he does a lot of great things that you've got to give him credit for when he's in the starting lineup because of, just the fit.
Mhm. For sure. And just because I know someone's gonna mention it in the comments, I'm aware that he's averaging 2 turnovers a game, and we just complimented his decision making. To me, those turnovers are just the game hasn't yet slowed down for him because those are good passes, Jude. Like, I think he has the right idea. It just takes him half a second too long, and he lets the defense rotate, or, he's just not used to the length and athleticism of NBA defenses yet. Once he figures that out, that won't be as glaring, and also, every great playmaker also has
Right.
turnovers, except for like John Stockton, Chris Paul, and like maybe I'm missing somebody. But for the most part, all ball dominant guys, Luca, James, Harden, like Russell Westbrook, they're all going to have, more turnovers than the average guy. Um, and I was going to say one other thing about him before I finished off.
Well, here, let me just
Go
jump
ahead, chime
in.
in, chime in.
Just, it's okay for rookies to be able to, adjust to the speed of the NBA.
Mhm. Yes, correct. It
Was
is
that was
expected.
that
That's
what
not
you were gonna say?
No, I was gonna say, additionally, if you watch these games, he is not getting any calls
Oh
offensively.
yeah,
So a lot of these turnovers are
they
blatant
hack him,
fouls,
dude.
and they're
Yeah,
just not calling it because he's a rookie. But like, go watch the tape. Like, and he
yeah.
doesn't usually like get mad at the refs,
Hmm.
but lately he's literally like he just turns around and looks at him
I've
like,
seen it.
"What the
Yeah,
heck?" Like,
he
and
did
he's
it in
not an
Paris.
emotional guy. Yes, he did do
Yes.
it in Paris a few times, but I mean, it's kind of. I'm sure it's getting to him a little bit. It's got to be frustrating because these are obvious hacks.
And I think he'll, eventually they'll start doing that, especially being on the same team as Victor. It's going to
Hmm.
start happening as his star continues to rise. And that's the other thing. I mean, I think, look, I understand that sometimes there are just things about guys that like that's just who they are in some
Hmm.
areas, and it's not going to change. For 20-year-old rookie Stephon Castle, I'm not really ready to say that about anything in his game yet. So
That's fair.
I'm gonna give him some time there. I definitely get your sentiment there. Like, yes, he is averaging turnovers, but he's a rookie getting like significant reps as a ball handler in the
Hmm.
NBA for the first time.
Yeah, and to be honest,
They
he wasn't exactly.
literally okay, Scoot Henderson. Like, imagine like
Mhm.
that. Let's apply the Scoot Henderson standard because
Oh yeah,
everybody, you know what I mean, to him, to this
he's playing
season.
really well
And
lately.
he is because again, it takes time
Hmm.
anyways. We're
And
not trying
Stephon,
to make excuses for people all the time. It's just
right?
with young players, sometimes like Larry Markkinen, he didn't really pop off until he was like 25. And he's a very valuable player. Everybody wanted him on our team this summer. That's my rant.
That very valid rant, Jude. And if you really think about it too, at UConn, while he did have playmaking skills and he did
Right.
occasionally run point, he really wasn't like a ball dominant point as he is now with the
Uh-huh.
Spurs. Like he
Yep.
really hasn't been that since high school. So I'm sure this is even more of an adjustment than typical because he didn't even get reps like that in college necessarily.
Yeah, 100%. He was much more of a wing for them because of the guard depth that they have, and some of those guys, are playing for other teams in the league right now.
Mhm.
Um,
You
but
know what?
yeah,
All this is gonna change, Jude, after All-Star break when the NBA and the referees are like, "Okay, this guy's actually a star because he's gonna
yeah.
shine and be big during the slam dunk contest," which he is officially a part of. Shout out my guy Stephon Castle. We just talked about this too, Jude.
Dude, I'm so glad that was the smoothest transition ever to some Spurs news that somehow I didn't put in the rundown, but we need to
All good?
talk about that. Shout out to Stephon Castle being in the dunk contest. Mac McClung is in it as
Yep.
well. Have you seen anybody else who's going to be in it?
It's a guy from the Bucks. I'm sorry, I forget his name. He's got an afro. Let me
Andre Jackson Jr. Yeah.
yes, and as another rookie, it's Matas Buzelis from the Bulls.
Oh, okay. Okay. That's a good little
Who
cast. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Matas and Stefan were in a dunk contest back in high
Yeah.
school together, I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
So that'll
Okay,
be
that's
interesting rematch.
that'll get me to watch the dunk contest. And Ethan, you were talking about that last episode. You were just saying, "Hey, I just hope that there's this a spur involved in something like the 3-point contest or the dunk contest, not just the
Mhm,
skills challenge. We've gotten that with Tony and we got that with Wemby. And obviously we got Wemby in the All-Star game.
mm.
But you were hoping for that and we got it.
God bless, they did it finally. And you know what? Bring back the horse competition too. Let's get Wemby in the horse
Ooh,
competition.
I like that. One-legged 3 horse. Yes,
Mhm.
I'm down
Yes.
for it. You know what I'm thinking about? I was talking about those Memphis games as much as, they unfortunately, they were both losses, and especially that second game, the second half was really ugly.
Mhm,
Stephon was dunking, like, with ease in those
mhm,
games. Like, they weren't the craziest, like, flashiest dunks, like, for a dunk contest, but you could see the athleticism he has that if
mhm.
he's in an open floor, like he could do some fun stuff. I'm not saying like he's gonna for sure win, but like you said, I think honestly, I think his star is for sure gonna rise
Mm.
after that slam dunk contest, and hopefully that leads to him getting hacked or getting some whistles when he gets hacked more.
Please, for the
Or
love of
yeah,
God. You know, what's funny about Stefan as a dunker, like, we all know he's got
uh-huh.
hops, we know he's got a crazy vertical, but when he dunks, it never looks like he's jumping hard.
Yeah, no,
Does that make
right.
sense?
No, that's kind of what I was trying to say. Again, like the dunks weren't crazy against Memphis, like flash wise, but you can just see it. It looks so effortless
Yes, effortless is
almost.
the right word.
And so when you see that, when you think about him in the dunk contest, it's like, I see why they put him in. I see why they invited him.
I just hope he has something like he never does anything flashy, like you said. So we're gonna have to
But
see what he has in his bag.
But see, the great thing too is that this isn't a game situation, and so that's the thing. Like he's so serious, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
doesn't you don't want to do the flash and then risk it, you know what I mean, and have a
Mhm.
turnover instead. Where now because it's open floor, like I think we're gonna see some good stuff from Steph.
His vibe next to the other 3 guys,
Yeah.
he like D Rose, the Eastern Conference All-Stars
Uh-huh.
that one year. Remember
Yeah.
when they were all like dancing? He was just like,
That's gonna be
"That's
no,
literally gonna be
for sure.
Stephon."
Oh my goodness. Well, man, a lot of dunk contest talk, a lot of Stephon and Devin talk. I know we're talking about these next 3 home games being crucial before the rodeo road trip, especially with the Spurs record.
Mhm.
Um, and in Paris again, we saw the best and the worst
Yes, we
of
did.
the San Antonio Spurs. It can be a turnover fest with inefficient, clunky shooting, even with Harrison Barnes having another 20-point game and Chris Paul being on the floor. So even with the veterans, you see shades of the
Mhm.
past 2 seasons from times to time. But then also, when the Spurs are at their best and they're locked in and they're playing connected, and I don't really know what the issue is kind of to close the gap to switch that on and off. It may just be reps,
Mm.
honestly, and experience in the NBA, and that may just take time. That's probably what I would personally lean. Um, but when it does click, Ethan, I mean, you can see you could really see that was an example of what the Spurs are trying to build. And that's not saying the roster is going to be exactly the same, especially with Victor. And we've talked about that. I
Mm.
also sent you another text about AJ Pentanza, or
It's
I
the Bansta.
I totally butchered
Die
that.
Banstanza. The
Thank
Bansta.
you. DeBansta, who's the number one player in the 2026 high school class, who's going to
Mhm.
go and play basketball at BYU. He's stated multiple times that he wants to play with Victor. You'll only see that more as Victor continues to get better, and guys like Stephon Castle continue to emerge. If we continue to see consistency from Devin Vassell, so the Spurs do have the ability to make moves and continue to improve that roster to put them in the best position to win a championship. But you also saw that even with today's roster, when they're playing at their best, they can really play a high level of basketball. But again, it's all about building that consistency.
Consistency is the key word. I think that's going to be the key word from game 1 to game 82 this year, Jude. All I'm going to ask from the Spurs is that they please, 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 for the love of God, have a better record than the Detroit Pistons by the end of the year. Because I made a bet with my
Yo,
boss, Mike Engel, that the Pistons would be worse than the Spurs.
dude,
And right now we're 3 games behind. And Cade Cunningham looks like an all-star.
but like I was thinking about that today because I was looking to see what was on tonight, and I saw they were playing the Cavs on
Hmm.
NBA TV, and I was like, "Dang, they're 23 and 22." But I had seen some stuff on Twitter, so I had heard about it, but I just hadn't looked at the standings in a
Pretty
long
good.
time, and I was like, "Dude, they're doing pretty good." But again, and I don't mean to. This isn't like credit to the Pistons, and
Oh,
like
yeah.
you said, man, like Jalen Duren is a beast for them. Like you said, Cade Cunningham is a star. I have Cade Cunningham on my fantasy team.
He's
He's
a real
back.
deal.
He's backpacking me, dude, like 100%. But I do think it helps that they're in the East a little bit, and it's also like kind of who would have saw that coming going into this year as well,
Yeah, I really thought it was over for them when they added Tobias Harris, and
right?
and and he hasn't been playing great for them. I think he's like
It's
15 and 5, but still, they're kind of in the same boat as the Spurs. Like they added a couple veterans, no big names, and here they are, just letting their young
maybe
talent grow.
maybe young players get better.
If we were in the East, Jude, you're right
I'm not
though. If
trying
we
to be
were
pompous. I swear,
no,
like
I know what you're doing. Yeah, if we were in the East, I think we would be better than the Pistons for sure.
I agree. Yeah.
But we're in
But
the West.
credit to him. Yeah, right, right. It is what it is, and the bet's the bet for sure.
Mm, hurts my heart.
But man, that it is wild to see that the Pistons are turning it around, like even without like Tobias, really going crazy.
February 21st, Pistons versus Spurs. Everybody grab their
Let's go.
popcorn.
Let's go. Got the Wemby shirt on. This is the other one.
Mm,
This is just the regular Spurs colors on there. So you got the Fiesta there, and I got the Hemisphere Fiesta from this year. I got all that gear from Christmas. And you see Manu up there?
I see them.
Oh, wait. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. New Spurs
Always
stuff will be
always in
right
my
here.
heart. always in my heart. And, you see these 2 trophies here. This will be the last thing I'll say. I got my 3rd. Those are fantasy football championship trophies.
Wow.
Got my 3rd this year. I only won 1 of my leagues. I was in 3. We'll keep it real. I lost the other 2. Had some playoff runs, but
Mm.
fell short. But in this one, which are what these trophies are for, 3rd. 3 and 4 years. Dynasty.
Well, Jude, I think anyone that wants
That's
to
the
know
Spurs coming soon.
anyone that wants the secret to being a 3-time fantasy champion, you gotta join 20 leagues every year, and you'll be
There
a
you
3-time
go.
champ.
You join 30 leagues every year. You're bound to win one of them.
Exactly.
We
Diversify.
appreciate There you go. We appreciate you guys, and we will finally be back with a post game this Wednesday against the Los Angeles Clippers. Hopefully, the Spurs can get a dub, and we will be breaking down that game afterwards. It's been a minute since the schedules worked out, and it finally did. So, if you enjoyed the content and are excited for that, don't forget to hit that that like button and the subscribe button below. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I messed that one up. Don't forget to hit the like button and the subscribe button below if you enjoyed the content. And if you want to stay updated with the show, follow us on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, and at Ethan_Quintero. We appreciate you guys. We'll catch you on the next one. Go Spurs, go.